Wow, this is. I wasn't expecting this. There's so many people I have to thank. Thank you, Bess, and all the folks at the Silicon Valley WebBuilders. Thanks, Yahoo, for letting us have the meeting here. In particular, I want to thank Chad Dickerson for greasing the wheels, Samuel Young for making them turn. I want to thank the Ajax Strike Force for watching my back. You're great guys. I'm glad you're on my team. I want to thank our distinguished panel, but most of all, I want to thank you, because if it weren't for you, you wouldn't be here tonight. So we're going to have a really good show for you tonight. It's of timely importance, I think. We're looking at the browser wars again. Now, a lot of you were podlings back during the first browser war, so I'm going to catch you up on what you may have missed the first time around. There was an upstart company. First, to correct the metaphor, we've got sort of a Star Wars theme going here tonight, which I guess the metaphor suggests that Netscape was the Rebel Alliance and Microsoft was the evil empire. I'm not making that up. That was in the press at the time. But I don't think it was ever an apt metaphor. I mean, Microsoft was never wholly evil, and certainly at the time, Netscape was not wholly good either. There's a lot of darkness on both sides. I think that situation looked a lot more like Deadwood, where Netscape, the upstart, was the Gem Saloon, and Microsoft was the Bella Union. And there's a lot of cutthroat going on, but at the same time, they found that it was sometimes to their interest to cooperate and work together for the benefit of the community, which would benefit them as well. So we had this intense competition going on, technical and business competition between two companies. And the expression of that competition was web browsers. It seemed like every week another edition of one or the other browsers came out. And they came out really fast. There used to be a time when web time meant it was going really, really fast. Not like today where web time means you're going to have to wait for it. So it might sound nice to have new browsers coming out all the time with new features which make it easier to do certain things and correct certain bugs. And that's really nice. And a lot of people see that that's about to happen again and look at it with some anticipation. But the thing you have to experience or remember from that experience was bugs in the web don't get fixed. So if someone ships a browser and a bunch of people pick up on it and then realize, oops, we made some mistakes. So they put out another browser which has a different set of mistakes in it. The original browser doesn't go away. There are some people who will stay on that one for a while and not migrate. And then it's, whoops, we put out another one. And so you can't depend on bugs getting fixed. Bugs only accumulate. And during the height of the browser war, both companies were pumping bugs into the web at a phenomenal rate. And I should, they were literally in a battle for their lives. Netscape had claimed to have discovered a new platform which allowed applications to run independent of the operating system. And that was a provocative thing for Microsoft. And so Microsoft decided we need to destroy these guys. There was this fierce battle. In the end, Netscape self-destructed. And a little seed was left over from Netscape, which grew into Mozilla, which started off like a Netscape with several layers of extremely bad management taken out of it. And that little company is doing really well now. But at the time, Microsoft saw that Netscape had been destroyed. Microsoft wasn't, if I may suggest, was not really in the web for the web. They just wanted to eliminate a competitive threat. So once the war was over, Microsoft disbanded the IE team. And this is true. It put them on what they thought would be more productive activities, like developing Avalon, which was going to be the future of application development. But while Avalon was happening, a really interesting thing happened. Because Microsoft stopped pumping bugs into the web, I should say that in a more positive way. Because Microsoft stopped innovating, a wonderful thing happened. It turns out that most people, particularly in Microsoft's market, don't upgrade their browsers ever. They upgrade their computers, and the computer comes with a new browser. So it took several years for IE4 to leave the market, for Netscape 4 to leave the market, for Netscape 5 to leave the market, for Netscape 5.5 to leave the market. So now pretty much, or as of 2 years ago, I'm sorry, I'm talking about IE now. So what was left was IE6, which was not a bad browser. It's actually pretty good. Arguably the best browser Microsoft ever made up until that time. As a consequence of that, Jesse James Garrett in 2005 made the discovery that, hey, you know what? You can do really interesting things with a web browser. I bet nobody ever heard of that before. And so he started running around saying, hey, I found this Ajax thing. Did you know that there's this XML HTTP request thing that you can hook up with dynamic HTML? Who knew? Now, the reason Ajax was interesting in 2005 when it wasn't as interesting in 2000 was because the browser environment was so unstable because of so many variations of browsers that it really wasn't an effective platform for application development. It was just way too hard. But as a result of the Microsoft piece, it got stable, which is great, which is why we're now looking at doing really serious applications in the browser again. But Microsoft has awoken, and it is beginning to innovate again. So we've got IE7 that came out last year. It's pretty good, but it's different. And so, you know, as a developer, you'd like to say, hey, I want to get on IE7 and do whatever it does. But the majority of the market share is still in IE6, so you have to be very, very careful in how you go forward with that stuff. Concurrently with that, we now have not one, but 3 competitors to Microsoft. And we have to deal with all of those as well. So now the question becomes, how do we manage innovation going forward? We can't go back to the Wild West sort of thing that we had in the first browser world where they keep trying to one-up each other with new features. That's just not going to work. It's going to be destabilizing, and we can't afford to have the web be destabilized. In 2000, the business of the web was mainly a Ponzi scheme. Here in 2007, it's a real business now, and so we can't afford to have that kind of fast and loose stuff. One of the reasons why we had the shootout in the web in the first place was the web standards were wholly inadequate. And so a lot of the things that Microsoft gets a lot of flack on at these developer shows, I think Microsoft did the right thing. They tried to make sense out of some really inadequate standards, and I think in many cases they made very good choices. The choices don't match the standards, but it was a reasonable opinion to say that the standards were themselves inadequate. Is that going to continue to work going forward? I don't know. I don't think we can have the browser makers just making up stuff and flinging it at the market and see if it sticks or not. But we also don't want to have innovation happening in the standards body, because we've seen lots of cases where a standards body makes up new stuff and proposes it and throws it at the market, and that goes pretty badly as well. So one of the things I'd like us to talk about tonight is how do we go forward? How do these really smart guys who are going to make some really good products that we're going to build even better products on top of, how's that all going to work? So the format for the rest of the evening is I'm going to invite each of our panelists to come up and make a brief statement. Halcon Lee from Opera is not here yet. He was delayed in traffic, but I'm hoping he'll be here within an hour. After their talks, then we're going to turn it over for questions. So basically, this is going to be a dialogue between you and them. I'm going to be the moderator, and so these are my rules. Don't be boring. If anybody gets up and starts being boring, I'm going to play you off, and get on. We've got too much interesting stuff to talk to get bogged down on anything. If you want to make a speech, put it in your blog. That's not what we're here for. So keep it interesting, keep it fast. Ask your questions at the microphones. I reserve the right to cut anybody off and to interject my own questions and comments at any time. My decisions will be final and brutal.
So I am Chris Wilson. I'm the Internet Explorer Platform Architect at Microsoft. That is a really fancy title. It's not actually my official title because we have really strange official titles. But basically I tell people what we need to do in the web platform, which of course is a great job for me because I love telling people what to do. I've actually worked on web browsers for a really long time. I started NCSA on NCSA Mosaic in 1993. I joined Microsoft in 1995 and worked on every major version of IE since IE 2.0. So yes, you can blame me for IE in some way at least. I wrote code in it originally too, and wrote the original CSS implementation in IE 3. Blame me for that one also. But I was really excited to be here. I'm actually really looking forward to hopefully Håkon making it in as well, but also sharing the stage with Mike, somebody who's been instrumental in the Mozilla organization and kind of the open source effort there. And of course, Håkon's work with CSS kind of speaks for itself. But I had a few things that I do want to talk about. I promise there are very few. This actually isn't intended to be a political statement. We can get into that later after a few drinks. But the first thing that I wanted to say is really, I think there's this misperception that we're about to enter another round of the browser wars. I kind of hate the term, actually. It's sort of applied, I guess, the first time around. But this time, there's not really a war. We're not, it's not about one person crushing another, or there being one true browser that everybody uses. It's not about reducing the operating system to a set of poorly debugged device drivers. I think we've actually proven that the operating system has more to offer than just being a poorly debugged set of device drivers. Even if the operating system isn't Windows Vista. Well, you knew I had to say it. Microsoft did fly me down here. And I promise that's the last mention of the B word. So this time, though, really is about building this standards-based web platform that unifies a bunch of different browsers, a bunch of different users, really more than that, a bunch of different scenarios, right? A bunch of different devices even. And I think that really does require us all to work together and to build a common system. And, in short, this isn't 1995, and we're really not building the 1995 platform anymore. We're really trying to build, a platform that fulfills the vision that we had when we started designing this really dynamic web browser platform in, say, IE4, I guess, was the first round where we really took that on. It's been really fulfilling to me to see people start adopting that. In fact, more than anything, there's this idea that Microsoft started panicking when the browser usage share dropped a little bit and Mozilla actually got a few users. Really, more than anything, the reason why we started refocusing on the browser, and the browser platform in particular, is people started using it. Right? There were compelling web apps being built. And without that, without the work of the people in this room, and in particular the people in this building, because I got to say, just for a little free plug, Flickr is one of my favorite applications, that wouldn't have happened, right? It wouldn't have mattered as much to us without people building applications that were really useful. Now, the problem that we have, though, is that this underscores a responsibility that we have, and that Microsoft has in particular, because we have to maintain the web. We have something on the order of 500 million users. 500 million, like 500 million users. I say that several times because I've said this up on stage with tons of people in front of me 5 or 6 times at least now, and every time my brain just kind of skips from one side of that phrase to the other, because I can't even imagine 500 million people. I remember being in NCSA and getting really, really excited when we had the 1,000th download of NCSA Mosaic, because that was an incredible number, and this is 500 million times that, 500,000 times that. But despite what a bunch of people may think, in fact, someone who is supposed to be here but isn't, our problem at Microsoft, our challenge, is not that we have some kind of broken web engine that we can't actually develop, or was designed back in some ancient history lesson, and we really can't bring it forward. The problem that we have is anytime we change anything in that system, even for improving it, we break people, and we cause problems in the web. And our challenge is even a little different from the other browser manufacturers because we do have this huge legacy. And wow, look at any web page anywhere, and I will nearly guarantee you, you really have probably a 80% probability that somewhere in that web page or linked to it, there's some switch based on the browser user agent, and it's doing something different to hack around IE problems or hack around problems in other browsers, whatever. And that causes a problem for us in particular because we let something sit that probably wasn't quite right according to the standards for so long. So every time we change something, we cause differences on the web for, again, 500 million users. Like 500 million users, and my mom goes through a banking site and it doesn't work, and things get laid out wrong, or she can't read it or whatever, and I'm sure you know who she calls, but thankfully not everybody has my phone number. My mom's enough, really, and I'm not picking on her because she really is very computer literate, but she does blame me. So we've used some tools in the past to get around this problem. So who here knows what Quirks mode is? I'm kind of surprised. I figured it would be more. So Quirks mode is this idea of using the doc type in an HTML file to tell you whether the person who developed the site understood standards and really wanted to use standards, or was, let's say, ignorant of standards and just slammed out some HTML code in Notepad. The problem with this is that when we started, when we shipped IE6, even after that, about 5 years ago, I remember doing a search, and it turned out of the top 200 US websites, exactly one of them was not in Quirks mode. Exactly one of them said, oh yeah, I understand standards, this is real HTML, please make me follow the real HTML rules and give me the real CSS layout and everything. Now, that's great. It was great that we could do that because that meant 0.5% of the web was going to be affected if we changed things in standards mode. But today, actually not today, yesterday, I ran the same query. Any guesses as to how much of the top 200 websites are using standards mode? Anybody? 100. I heard 100. Half, actually, almost exactly half. It was 99 of the top 200. So 49% of the web, by extrapolation, and I'll get into that in a second, is in strict mode. It is in standards mode. I shouldn't call it strict mode. It's kind of a bad habit. So if we limit our changes to strict mode, to standards mode, then we're still causing changes in behavior for half of the web. And that obviously gets us into a lot of trouble. Each and every one of those changes we did in IE7 to improve our standards behavior, I guarantee you I can find a page that breaks because of it, that works differently because of it, and we had to go get the page author to change it. Or, the user just thinks that we're broken, which of course is sort of a bad thing. So the short version of this really is that Quirks mode by itself is no longer a good way for us to kind of segment the web off. You can expect, and this is kind of a teaser for the future, we're going to have to ask web developers to come up with some way to more explicitly opt in to standards-based behavior. And I expect we really need to do this for all of the browsers too, because I think we'll all end up with the same entrenched bad behavior that we can't really change, or we start breaking people and causing problems. So the last thing that I want to talk about is IE itself. And that really the point of this whole slide is just Microsoft and Internet Explorer in particular. We are actually back in the game. We are actively developing. The whole team is back hard at work back in Redmond, and I looked at my email this evening, and I've only been gone for like 8 hours, and I already don't know how I'm going to, I'm just going to delete it all. It's fine. But, as a community, you've been demanding this standards-based web platform from us for, years, really. But we're actually listening, is the point. And we are hard at work delivering that, and you should expect this, actually, to have kind of a different character and to be very focused on that standards-based web platform in IE. In fact, if you look at the work that we did in IE7 in the web platform, it's actually all standards-oriented work. Like, we did all kinds of work to improve our standards compliance in the platform, and didn't go hog wild adding proprietary features like we have been possibly rightfully accused of in the past. So in short, IE Next is coming. We are hard at work in delivering more things. With that, I'm going to leave the stage to Mike. I think he's going to say a few words, and then I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion. I think that's really what I'm here for more than anything. So thank you.
Great. I don't need to tell the whole story of the browser wars and got back in 97. So, and I'd actually very much like to thank Chris for his work on 97. I think it is a huge step forward for the web. I think it would have been quite sad for all the nice things that were on 96, and as Doug says, it's, well, in hindsight, we'd rather have a better browser at the time. It's a pretty sweet browser. I think it would have been pretty sad if that was the last browser the web ever knew. And what I want to talk about a little bit, Chris touched on this, that it's not really a browser war, though it is kind of a neat jingle, and it obviously fills a room, so that's cool. And thank you all for being here when you could be whatever else it is you do on these evenings. But there's a different sort of character to whatever market struggle or mindshare struggle is going on between the major browser vendors, which I think is the politically correct term for whatever. I don't have to specify a list of people and get mail from the Lynx guys complaining I left them out. Because we're here, right? The first browser war, if you will, was really a war for dominance of the web. It was a battle to exert and develop control over the platform through which people were going to view the world's internet resources. And I think that the more important effort, more important conflict even, if you will, now is a battle for dominance of the web and by the web, for the web to be where people build the applications we're going to be excited about in 5 years, that the next Flickr, the next eBay, the next Gmail, I can say that in here, right? No lightning, no trapdoor. That those things are built on the web, that those are things that you can get to whichever browser you use, that you can get to whatever language you speak, whatever operating system, even Vista, should you choose to use it. That you can do that regardless of it's not last time he's going to mention it, but I'm going to harp on Vista the whole night. Because Microsoft didn't fly me anywhere. The universality of that web experience is perhaps obviously very important to Mozilla, and it's behind what we do with our technology, it's behind what we do working with other technologists like Chris, and working in a variety of different arenas for that. If that's for me, I'm busy, sorry, but I'll call them back. The current standards climate is one that's very different than it was in 2000s web was born, and it's different in both good and bad ways. I think it's different in good ways in that many, many more people in the world care about what happens in a standards body, and that's both a sort of nice intellectual curiosity for people who knew what the W3C was back then, but it's also sort of a problem, I think, in that it's focused people on the belief that all positive innovation has to happen in the context of an incorporated or some organization with membership agreement, and I think that's not. I think that's not necessarily the healthiest thing for the web. I think that the developments we've seen in the W3C, where they revived the HTML working group, and Chris has been instrumental in that, and for that, thanks again, are very positive developments. But I think that it's not standards bodies are not built. They're not optimized for the case of experimenting and innovating and finding what the shape of a problem solution looks like. They're very good at, and have historically been very good at, taking a generally known problem space and defining them such that people can approach that from different technology bases and get an interoperable result. And that's a laudable thing, and people spend countless hours on that and poring over text that I just couldn't do, and that's excellent. But I think we do their work a disservice and their organizations a disservice. I think we do the web a disservice by believing that that's the only place these things can happen. I think interoperability is important. I think, there's other guys standing up here railing at standards, right? I think interoperability is the goal that's significant there, and I think that one of the challenges that faces this collection of browser cartel of browser vendors, which is what we get called by the people who aren't invited to these groups or don't come. We need to figure out how to experiment safely so that our failed experiments, which are a necessary byproduct of good experimentation, that those things don't linger on the web and pollute it over time, that there are ways for people to say that they want something experimental or they don't want something experimental and mean it, and it's okay if they say it's okay for you to break me, they don't actually ever mean that. So we need some way to get past that, and that's as much a social problem as a technical one, and I think that's the most exciting part of this modern sort of browser ecosystem for me, is that a lot more people care about it, and a lot more people expect more from it. It's no longer a battle of two large corporations fighting for market dominance to suit their business needs. Whatever, and the individuals working on both sides of that, with Chris as the obvious exception, wanted the good of the web. Apologies. But the climate now is such that people want to have their needs in the web expressed in a technology that gets built, whether it's browser features or content capabilities or what sites can talk to what sites, very mundane and boring bits like cross-site scripting, permission or protection, depending on which side of that mashup fence you're on today, or more significant things about how do we make dynamic HTML accessible to people with disabilities, right? How does a screen reader deal with an application that's a big block of Flash and a bunch of JavaScript and stuff that's hidden or hovered or so forth? These are hard problems, and they're ones that we need to be able to experiment safely to figure out. And I think that's the big challenge that I think faces us today, is figuring out how we can do that in a way that's fast, in a way that takes advantage of the huge parallelism that's in the web, which I think has been one of its major strengths, but in a way that doesn't require us to be having this conversation in 2015 and wondering how we're going to work around this horrible parsing behavior we put in Firefox 5 for some feature, or how we're going to get ourselves out of some hole we dug. And I think that requires cooperation from web builders. I think it requires some commitment there to whatever degree we can get it, that content builders and people who build tools we build content with will participate in the evolution of that web as well, and that they'll try to make the forward-proof thing and the standards correct thing and the accessible and localizable and operating system agnostic thing the easy thing, and that they'll share their best practices and help us improve the technology that we're building the web on. So I hope that's why you're all here. We're not actually going to wrestle or anything, but I hope you're as interested in that as we are. I really do believe Chris is. We've had a wonderful Dayton experience with Microsoft, and helping us, in fact, make our product that much better on Vista, and hopefully working with some of their other software in the future. I think it's a good time to be a web developer. It's a really good time to be a web developer who's willing to put their back into it and to tell us what they need and to help us figure out a solution that will work for them today and that they won't regret having recommended 4 years down the road. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Perfect, thank you. I've been granted my 10 minutes, even if I arrived late. First, I'd like to say, if you need a good browser for Windows 98, we have it. For a while to come.
All years.
In addition, thank you. Is that official?
I think probably get no needs to say you're welcome to the Windows 98.
Thank you. In addition to desktop browsers, at Opera we do browsers for devices, and especially for mobile stuff. And I'm going to show some of them. But first I'd like to get to the insulting part that I promised you. Ajax was mentioned several times in the invitation to come here. And I think it's a pretty good term, and we're stuck with it. At least we're stuck with the pronunciation of it, because everybody knows what it means and how it's being pronounced. The problem I have with it is, and we've been told this all the time, so it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That isn't quite true. Due to Doug, the XML isn't really there anymore. There isn't going to be any X. And I miss actually a C in here. I think CSS should have been mentioned. That happens to be my baby. But I'd like to propose a few alternate acronyms. So work with me here. Ajax, then we get the D for the DOM. The JavaScript is still there. I think JavaScript deserves its place. Asynchronous too, probably, but CSS should be there. Probably HTML as well. HTML is going to be here for a long time to come, but it's hard to get that H stuck into the acronym. Do you think any of these would fly?
Would X mean just anything?
Well, yeah, you can think of it that way. That's true. But still, yeah. Well, we'll see how this evolves. Brendan said actually that Ajax isn't an acronym, but I would reply that Ajax is. Okay. Next thing, my 2 next minutes are going to be about the ACID2 test. I don't know if you've covered this already. In order to get all these acronyms to work together, the HTML, the DOMs, the CSS, the JavaScript, to get it to work so that the script can work well, so that the documents are displayed correctly, we need good tests. And the ACID test was originally developed for CSS1 many years ago to make sure that the CSS1 implementers did the same thing, to make sure that you had an almost pixel-perfect rendering of sites. And 2 years ago, in 2005, when Microsoft announced that IE7 would be developed, some of us thought, hey, this is a great opportunity for browsers now to, again, come up with a good tests, make sure that we render sites the same way. So we developed the ACID2 test. I'm sure many of you have tried it, maybe looked at the source code, seen the smiley face on your screen. This is what it's supposed to look like if it renders correctly. Now, each and every pixel in this picture has some code associated with it. It's not only CSS, it's also HTML, for example. And in order to get it right, you had to be pretty good at rendering it. And this has been followed with interest in the web community. Here's a page that has been tracking different implementations, showing some that have been able to render it. I think Safari was first there. The WebKit people were first. Opera, we're supporting it too now after years of hard work. I've seen builds of Mozilla with it. It looks good. But then there are some browsers that don't support it yet. And unfortunately, Chris Wilson, yours is there. This page is actually pretty interesting. I think the URL, I included the URL because I think the URL in itself is pretty good. It looks sort of like porn. And it's drugs. So it's sex. We got sex and drugs. But then we also got violence. It gets worse. We got violence. Look at the bottom there. Those red ones at the bottom. This is really very bloody. This is IE7's rendering. It might be a beta. I don't recall, but I think this is very close to what IE7 is doing with the page. And if you compare that to another browser that I know quite well, this is Opera 3.6 from 1998. They look almost identical. All right. When we put Opera on new devices, the first thing I test is, of course, the ACID test. And this picture here shows the ACID test being shown on this device, which many of you have seen, I'm sure, and you have one too, right? The $100 laptop, which is an incredible thing. 400 megahertz, x86, 128 megabytes of memory. You can do incredible things with it. It suits Opera very well. We can actually make this thing into a very good surfing engine, a very good tablet. And we've just had a call from a big country. The thing is, the laptop is only sold to countries, right? So there's a limited number of customers, really. So when you get a customer calling, they represent millions of users. That's the beauty of it. Of course, if you can't deliver what they want, then it may not be so good. We'll see how it goes. They do have an open source policy for that unit. So Opera is not in, but we want to make it available in case people want to use Opera there. This is another device which some of you may have. The Nintendo Wii. Opera happens to be built into that one. It's a cute surfing experience. The hardware is surprisingly similar, actually, to this unit. roughly the same memory, roughly the same processing power. The Wii has more graphics that we use for adaptive zoom. I wish I could have it here and show you now how we zoom in and out of these web pages that we're displaying on the Wii. But I think actually the Wii is going to change the web in a nice way. A lot of sites, when we contact them and say, hey, you should fix your site, it doesn't render well in Opera, they say, ooh, nobody uses Opera, do they? But then lately we've been hearing, we had some people using Nintendo Wii's come and ask the same questions. So actually, a lot of Opera users are coming through the Wii now, which is a good thing. And people really want to make sure their sites render on the Wii because the Wii is so cool. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to try not to insult anyone here, on this last note, it's about a very important thing that I think we should look at as the web develops. We need to support video as a first-class citizen. We can't leave video to plugins anymore and to proprietary formats. I think it's crucial that browsers that handle text well, that handle images well, also can handle sound and video. And we should add tags to HTML for that. That's the video tag. And I have with me actually, and this is the first time I'm showing this outside of Opera, I have a beta alpha version of Opera. This was put together the last weekend, and I'm going to try to show to you what it could look like. It's not Opera's normal user interface you're going to see here now. Let's see, here you are. But it is Opera. It's a special build, and we've added support for the video element. If some of you are on the What working group mailing list, I think our proposal has gone out to that mailing list today. It's very simple. It's just a video element which has a source attribute, just like the image element. It can also take content, which is rendered in case the browser don't support the video element. And then it has simple bindings to JavaScript, to play a video, to pause a video, and to stop a video. So that here, now I play 3 videos concurrently in a browser without any plugins or anything. The second question, the first question being markup, what should the markup look like, what should the JavaScript code look like, etc. That's important, and there we want to discuss that with others. This is not something we're saying that this is done. This is something we're putting it up for discussion. We think this is important, and we hope that all browsers will come along there. And I've actually been in discussion with Mozilla on this, with Brendan on this for a couple of months. And I think there's mutual. We both want to see video as first-class citizens on the web. The second thing, though, is what kind of formats do we want to support? For images, we worked very hard to come up with PNG to replace GIF because GIF had all these patent problems. Now those patents have expired, but that took about a decade. JPEG has also had patent problems, and we seem to be able to get around those. But it's very important to consider patents when we choose new formats. And there aren't many good free video formats out there, but there are a couple of initiatives, and we have chosen to support one of them. This is Og Theora. It has an open source implementation that we can use. It's simple to put in. I think it adds to about 300K to the binary size of Opera, so it's not significant, and that includes the Og Vorbis part as well, the audio part of the Og efforts. And I think if browsers sit down and work on this and put it in, we could actually have support for video in multiple interoperable implementation before the end of the year. Wikipedia has actually chosen Og Theora as their format as well, so there is going to be content in this format. I think I hope you take this as an invitation, Chris. We've seen all the problems you've had in the last couple of days with the MP3 format that you put in. And even though you paid the Fraunhofer guys licensing fees for the patents, somebody else came up with patents. And we can never be sure that patent won't ruin it, but I do think the Og Theora guys have been pretty good at working to a free format, and I hope all browsers will support it. Thank you.
someone asked, where's Apple? I think maybe now's the time to ask. Some of you might not be aware that Apple makes a web browser. It's called Safari. It's only available on Macintosh currently, which is why you might not have heard of it. But we had heard of it, and we support Safari here. So when we were putting this panel together, we obviously went to Apple and invited them to participate, and they refused. So we invited them again, and they refused again. They said that they were really busy writing software.
I should try
And that they couldn't afford to send one guy the 6.5 miles north.
I drove by the campus on my ear.
Yeah, Infinity Loop number 1 to First Avenue. So, and I threatened them. I said, if you guys don't come, we're going to say some really disparaging things to the user community or to the developer community. Even more importantly, you won't be able to defend yourselves. And they said, we're not coming. So